very pleased actually to start the day today talking about new models for living in retirement. It's going to get us a little bit away from some of the very dense slide presentations that we had yesterday. In fact, you'd be happy to know Beth has no slides whatsoever. She is the author of the book that was in your bags the first night. And Jane, you brought your book. Can you just hold it up? There you go, with a little help from our friends, Creating Community. So Beth is a longtime journalist, an author. She's written for the Washington Post, AARP, Kaiser Health News, a bunch of others. She's also the features editor for Bioscience, which is the journal of the American Institute of Biological Sciences. We asked her here to talk about the book with a little help from our friends. The focus of the book is sort of reinventing how we create community for elders, which is a increasingly important part of the retirement conversation in this country. This is her second book on this topic. The first one was more focused on nursing homes. She has been a hospital worker. She's volunteered in hospice. She's been a family caregiver. And perhaps most important of all, she is a former National Press Foundation fellow. Not in this program. You were here for the cancer program.
Yep.
As some of you may know, we do a lot of programs on health-related topics in addition to our sort of financial and economic focus. So we have a cancer program. In the past, we've done an Alzheimer's program. That's not scheduled at the moment, but it could come back. We, in a couple of weeks, will be going to Denver for an obesity program. We're doing international lung health in Barcelona toward the end of the year, and we have done.
Yeah, I was going to say, sign me up.
We've done a series of programs on HIV/AIDS, on vaccine issues, and so forth. So if you have some peripheral interest in various health topics, you'll want to keep an eye. You definitely want to sign up for the newsletter if you're not already, because that will alert you to everything we have coming up, including those 4-day and longer programs, and also the webinars that we'll have coming thick and fast toward the end of the year. So sign up for the newsletter and watch the website. But in the meantime, back to retirement, back to Beth. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Happy to welcome you back, and take it away, please.
And if at any time you can't hear me, please signal. I'd really like this to be informal conversation as much as possible, so feel free to ask questions anywhere along the way. I'm going to be doing thumbnail sketches of all the models that I write about, which can get a bit confusing, so please stop me if I'm not being clear. I was struck by something Linda said, which was how can we create community for elders, and how what my book looks at is not that, but how elders themselves are creating community. So it's shifting the frame from how do we help these poor old folks to much more of a grassroots leading the way on how they want to live. And my basic hypothesis for the book is that our culture has been too focused on the independence, autonomy, I don't want to impose on anybody, part of the balance. And the relationship and community piece has gotten short shrift and to our detriment. So I'm arguing that as we grow older, just as at any age, we need to balance those two values of independence and community, and what some call that interdependence should be our goal. I got into this book after writing the one on nursing homes, which, like anybody who's fool enough to write a book, I assumed would sell like hotcakes, right? Nursing homes, But what I heard over and over was just the mantra, we don't want to go to a nursing home, therefore we don't care if there's good models of nursing homes out there. We just don't want to hear about it, period. So the whole aging in place, which I'm sure you've heard this phrase, is what AARP has been putting out there for decades based on their surveys. Aging in place is what people want. But I was a bit skeptical of what that really meant. And it seemed to me that aging in place was only as good as the place you're aging in, and that often aging in place meant people were left isolated, marginalized, alone. So I began to hear about models where people were really trying to form strong networks and bonds. The first being the village model, which I don't know if you all have been into this, but the village model, I'll just start now with giving you the thumbnails of the different models. The village is I think, the fastest growing, and it's a neighbors helping neighbors model. There's updated figures from what's in my book. There's now 125 villages and about an equal number in formation around the country. And what it is a membership organization. So you generally pay dues to join a village. You have one place you can call for any kind of help you need: transportation, help with your computer, walking your dog, just about. There's no limit to what you can ask from the village, as long as it's not too medical. I mean, it's really a volunteer-based approach. They usually have one paid staff person and a whole lot of volunteers. And the volunteers are generally older people themselves, but also younger folks from the neighborhood. So it's a neighborhood-based, it's always a geographically based organization, the village.
Is it like in a neighborhood?
Yes. I mean, there's some that are actually in whole towns, like a whole town could be a village. But for example, in the Washington area, there's dozens we're sort of the hotbed for villages. In my town of Tacoma Park, there's one starting, and next door, Silver Spring, they've just started one. I just heard yesterday from a friend in Virginia, her neighborhood starting one. It's very appealing because it kind of guarantees not only that you can have some help, but also that they do a lot of social activities, walking clubs, book clubs, whatever. It's really whatever the folks who live there want, they try to provide.
So this is like a membership organization?
It is.
So is it like joining a country club? You have to be accepted, or?
No. No,
Or what?
you pay fees, and they vary nationally from $50 a year, which I don't think there's many that low, to $900. And most, I think, fall somewhere in the middle. And you pay those fees basically to cover the salary of the employee, the director.
And does everybody live like in a cluster then?
No, you live in your own home. I mean, that's the beauty of it. It really is allowing people to age in the homes that they're in.
What is the age?
It varies. Some cut it off at 55. Some have no age limit, but most of them do. 55 and older. They tend to average, the average age tends to be closer to 80 as far as the members.
How big is the geographical area usually?
I don't think there is a usually. Yeah, I know. The average number of people they serve is about 150. So that can be, depending how dense your town or neighborhood is, it could be very.
One in Coral Gables,
Mhm.
I did a story, it was at least 4 or 5 years ago, and it had started. It ended up failing, and part of the problem, they started it, a foundation started it, and they figured Coral Gables is a community in Miami that people, and I think the dues were like $700, $800. But you got a lot of things like, you need a ride to the doctor, and you called, or your roof leaked and you didn't know who to call. And they had vetted these places. But I was told, they decided not to do a story on that it had failed, but they had needed a break-even point
Mhm.
for the amount of seniors who would register or become, and they never got it, so even the foundation kind of pulled the plug. But then about a year later, Jewish Community Services in Miami started it in the Aventura area, which is a really highly dense. And, you didn't have to be Jewish, you didn't have to be using their services, but they started using their clients as, kind of, they paid a little extra. It wasn't $800 dollars. And supposedly last time I checked, it was still working, but they were nowhere
Well,
near the amount of people to make it financially viable.
you raise a good point that is in my book. It's a big question of if these are sustainable over the long haul. You get a lot of burst of enthusiasm from a group starting it, and none of them are sustainable just from dues money. There has to be a commitment to other kinds of fundraising. So there have been others that have failed for sure. So that's one of the big questions about villages. One interesting exception to that is in the Bethesda area, Bethesda, Maryland, part of D.C. It's an older community called Bannockburn, and they've decided to do an all-volunteer village. So they don't have a paid staff. They don't have dues. And theirs is chugging along real well. Actually, in my neighborhood, we're going to model after the Bannockburn. We didn't want the big
Is it
infrastructure.
money that-
The problem is money, yeah. The reason it's not sustainable.
So if you don't have, I'm sorry, if you don't have a staff person, how do you coordinate, like,
Help
Mr. and Mrs. Smith needs a ride to the doctor's office at 9 a.m.?
through a neighborhood listserv, basically.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Okay.
But when you say it can't be, it's really not sustainable in the sense that the members, after a while, you're losing them.
Right.
And you're not having.
You have to recruit all the time because
Yeah.
people die, or they
Right.
may have to move away because
Yeah.
they need more than will allow them to stay in their own home.
Some cities who really don't even want something like that. They kind of want older people to move out so they can bring younger people in. And
Jeez, I don't know.
I see that happen all the time.
Well, I don't know.
It is in Chicago.
Gee, that's depressing.
Well, they want them to get out of the big house so
Mhm.
that a
Right.
younger family can be in it.
Well, that might be. This is not started by cities, though, you have to understand. This is started by the older people themselves. Hmm.
Is there any evidence that it's a popular model in this generation because of the hippie movement and because people had kind of experimented in the 60s and 70s with different kinds of intentional communities around America?
Well, I've thought a lot, not just about the village, but the other models, about what is the impact of the baby boomers. And I think my belief is, it's not that there's any real studies to, this is just my belief, that what we want, we baby boomers, isn't terribly different from what our parents wanted, but I do think we have more confidence about experimenting and more willingness to kind of take charge, less willingness to just go with the top-down hierarchy that I believe exists in most traditional retirement communities. So I think there's something to be said for the baby boomers, but the people starting a lot of these models are not baby boomers. They're older than we are. They're in their 70s now. So I'm going to move along, and we can come back to the village, but I've got a lot of models, and I want to try to cover them. I think the next model I wanted to mention is, rather than neighborhood-based, it's an intentional community, and it's called co-housing. So that's generally building a place from the bottom up, or sometimes they adapt existing older, like a block of buildings, and make it co-housing. And that, again, you need a core of committed people to get it off the ground. Co-housing's, at least around in Washington, and I think nationally, is often one of the more expensive options because you're buying in. The legal structure is a condominium, so you're buying a unit. And here in our area, it can be more than $300,000 for a two-bedroom unit in a co-housing community. You sacrifice the big spaces that a lot of Americans are accustomed to in their homes for smaller spaces and big shared common spaces. So every co-housing community will have a dining room that everybody could eat at together if they felt like it. Usually once or twice a week, they have dinner together, and a few folks will cook for everybody else. They'll have a great big den where if 20 people wanted to watch a Nats game or the Oscars or the political debates, if you live in Washington, could get together and watch. There's always community gardens, a nice playground for the kids. It's a very nice model. It's sort of built-in community. They've designed them all so they're no back decks. It's all front porches overlooking common space, so it invites participation in the community. What could be considered a downside, as Jane and I were talking about earlier, is every co-housing community operates on a consensus style of decision making, which means you talk over difficult decisions till everyone can live with them. So it's not majority rules. So as you can imagine, this can lead to a lot of meetings. And for some people, that isn't how they want to spend their time at home. I mean, they can't force you to do this, but that's the goal. And the points of disagreement that I was told repeatedly cropped up are not that earth-shattering, and they can take a lot of time, like, should we charge $25 for our guest quarters, or should it be free? Where should the dogs be allowed to be in the community? It's that type of thing. So other than that, I think co-housing will be very appealing. And there's it's kind of a roughly equal number as villages, but each one serves a much smaller number of people. So I think there's now about 100 co-housing communities and an equal number in development.
So how is it financially viable? If you have a community dining room and all of that, how is that supported?
When they get the initial building loan, it's all rolled into that. So just like any condominium, you're paying not only for your unit, but you're sharing the cost of the common spaces.
Okay, but if you got a dining room, I guess I'm assuming that there's a cook or something.
No, there isn't.
Oh, you just bring
Sorry.
the food.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
A few of the members of the co-housing community will cook for the others, and they rotate. No, there is no staff. Some pay for landscapers. Others, the community does it themselves.
So like a condo, you'd have like a monthly assessment?
Right.
I've read about these in Denmark that are multi-generational, and
Right.
They just all live and use one huge kitchen to save money, and because they like it, and they get the old people babysit. And
This started in Denmark, this model.
okay.
And two California architects, husband-wife team, brought it to the United States. And also what started in Denmark, and is just now beginning in the United States, is senior co-housing. So I went to the first one, which is in southwestern Virginia, called Elder Spirit, started by a former nun. And that was a really interesting one because she sort of saw it through a social justice lens, and she dedicated half of their units as affordable housing, which is unusual for co-housing, because she absolutely wanted it to be for all economic classes of people to live there.
So most of these, the 100 that you're aware of, are multi-generational, or they're
Most
seniors?
are multi-generational,
Oh, okay.
and there are a handful that are seniors.
Do they build like amenities into the unit? Into the building? Like, is there a grocery store
No,
in the development now?
no. But often they're sited near walkable places that people want to go to. So like in Tacoma Park, ours, you can walk to the commercial area of our town. You can walk to the metro from the co-housing community. Most of these co-housing types I've found are pretty have high environmental consciousness. They like that they're having a smaller footprint for their own unit. They like often, therefore, not to be car dependent.
Do you have a sense on, of all the sort of co-housing projects that are launched, how many ultimately, sort of succeed?
Well, again, a lot of them don't. I don't have the figures of how many, but if you look at I gave you this handout with, and it has the Co-Housing Association. And if you look at their directory, it's very clear whether they've made it, whether they're in formation, whether they've just had one meeting, and you can kind of get a sense of how far along. And there's a few sad ones that say, you know, we had to fold up our tent, we couldn't do it, you know. So it's
What do you mean that they couldn't do it? That
they couldn't raise the money, they couldn't get enough interest in their community to.
So it's not like they started and then.
Some they got pretty far into it and couldn't complete the building, I think. But I think
They're just infighting, right? Like,
Hmm?
just fighting, like over reaching consensus about who picks up the dog poop and all that stuff.
My
Excuse
wife
me.
and I
Uh-huh.
lived in our bigger neighborhood area in Wichita, and this would have probably been in the mid-90s. A group came to the neighborhood association and with plans to do just exactly this, and they succeeded in executing their plan in terms of building building the facilities and that sort of thing, but it
didn't
make
work.
it.
So
No.
just converted to a regular condo, or? Well, anyway, it doesn't
You
matter.
know, I have no idea.
Mhm.
I don't even know if it's inhabited at this point.
Hmm.
But I mean, they built entire new structures.
Wow, that's
on
too
this
bad.
plot of land, and you know.
But I don't want to leave with the impression that these are all doomed to failure and they're just horrible with people bickering. They're really, for most people, I think, who have chosen co-housing are very happy. They like having this kind of built-in friendship community. And
Is it quite a process, of being approved by the housing?
well,
You have to be into
because it's a condo, the individual, if they want to move, has the right to sell to whomever they wish. That said, most people have a commitment to trying to explain to potential buyers what they're getting into because they want everybody to be happy. So they tried it. They have an orientation. They have a way of introducing people to the concept of co-housing if they're going to consider living there. Usually, I think people get it. Sometimes they don't, and they sell. Is that what you mean? But it's not like people get to vote. Does Sally get to live with us? That would really be tough.
Although, often when you buy a condo, you do have to be approved by the board of
Yeah.
directors. They look at
At your
financial
financials?
stability,
Oh.
They probably do a background check.
Well, I don't know about the financial piece, but I know as far as if you'll fit in with the community, they don't have power over that.
But
Yeah.
don't these also have to be built, you know, keeping in mind that they're being built for older people with maybe wider doors and handrails and, you know, all that?
Well, the senior co-housing would certainly consider that. Most of these are multi-generationals. But, I mean, towards the end of my book, I talk about the whole design piece. There's another whole movement of universal design, which is trying to make all of us design our homes in a way that is age-friendly, that will serve us no matter what. So that's another new trend that fits nicely with these models.
Now, I remember reading a story about moving retirees into like college campuses.
Right.
Is that the same as, because I remember they called it like co-housing and
Well, it could be co-housing. There's also, I didn't cover that model in my book because not entirely, most of my models are more grassroots as opposed to a developer deciding. I think these university ones it's a developer matched with a university campus to make use of their space and to create, it's a nice model. Then the older people can take classes for free, and that's really taken off. I do not cover that in my book, but
it's
that.
not
It's nice. It's a nice. It's retirement community or whatever, however you want to call it.
maybe I read that's what I'm.
No, I don't know, but it's next. It's based very near universities. I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they get-
Yeah, that's
lecturers
another
come
new
in and
trend.
it's nice.
Are they just developing around the concept of age, or are they also developing kind of thematically, like you said, people that are particularly interested in the environment or in social justice? Because it seems like in Washington, like I lived for a year in the Sojourners magazine community, which
Oh,
was
wow.
Columbia Heights used to be inner city, and there was this intentional model where we would work in the inner city and write a magazine. Of course, now those people own their housing cooperative. Like they own their homes and they have, you know, and they're worth millions. But all over Mount Pleasant, you see these youth homes in my neighborhood that are like group houses.
Right.
And it's the biking cooperative, or it's the World Peace House, or whatever. And they're just
I'm going to get to that because I have a whole chapter on affinity groups, but not as co-housing.
sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker. Another model that's been around a long time, but again is growing, is housing cooperatives. So these can be, I went to a really fun one in Central Oregon of basically a trailer park cooperative. The owner died. They were going to lose their land that their homes were sitting on, which a lot of people who live in manufactured housing are at risk of losing their homes because of this. So they worked with a nonprofit, the residents, and bought the land, formed a housing cooperative. Couldn't be a more affordable way to live. And in fact, manufactured housing is the largest source of affordable housing in our nation that is not subsidized. And I think it's a really great model. People loved it. They'd gotten much closer together through forming this cooperative. They now had security. So that's a big thing happening in rural areas. New Hampshire's the leader of this. There's more than 100 just in New Hampshire of these manufactured housing cooperatives. Again, like co-housing, some are senior. The one I went to in Oregon was for 55 and older. Most of these co-ops are multi-generational, so you can structure it any way you want. There's no extra services. This is just your but actually manufactured homes are quite good for older people. They're single story, it's compact, easy to get around.
With the caveat that they can't work everywhere.
Right.
I'm guessing South Florida, they don't even allow new ones anymore.
No.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, this
blow away.
To harden those against hurricanes.
none of these models are going to work for everybody and every place, and that's why I think it's great that there's so many choices. The other kind of housing cooperative is in cities, of course. Apartments, especially New York City, is kind of the birth of all that, started by labor unions trying to serve impoverished workers, like in the New Deal era and even earlier. But there's some great senior cooperatives as well as multi-generational ones in cities. The upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin is real big on housing cooperatives. And so, it's similar to co-housing, only you own everything. You don't own your own little unit, you own the building in common. And I'm talking about what's called limited equity cooperatives, which means you're not going to cash in and make $1 million when your real estate goes up. They limit how much the value increases. They have a cap on it because they want to keep these as affordable as possible. But I'm not a legal expert, so I won't go into the details of that. But so cooperatives are another model. Another one is NORCs. Anybody heard of NORCs? You heard about them yesterday? Oh, okay. So I won't. Well, naturally occurring retirement communities. So it's similar to the village in my view, but what I think is nice about the NORCs, if they're providing services, it's for everybody who lives in that neighborhood or town. You don't have to pay to join. The problem with a village, two people living side by side, one might be a village member, one might not, and so they can't access the village unless they pay the dues. Like our Greenbelt, Maryland is a NORC. The city of Greenbelt hired a person they call community resources advocate. I think that's right. She is the one you call if you're older or disabled in Greenbelt. She connects you to all the services. She's a genius at getting free services for people, and they've coupled that with an incredible volunteer bank. They have hundreds of volunteers that help each other out. So that's a really nice model, I think. There's not a lot of them. I'm sure under 100 that are up and running with services for folks.
And is that something it's supported, her salary is covered by the
town? Yes, but the whole piece of her program is under $200,000, and she does so much.
Right.
She serves, when she started, she had 85 clients. Now she has 900 there in the town of Greenbelt. She's partnered with medical schools and nursing schools to create a geriatric rotation. So the nursing and med students come to Greenbelt, provide free home health checks to people that can't. I mean, you can do a lot without a lot of money is one of the big things I got out of writing this book. There's a lot of creativity out there that's very exciting.
Yeah, those are very interesting details in terms of how these things actually are
Work,
working.
yeah.
The fact that she's bringing in actual medical care, and you said she's a genius at getting
Yeah.
services. That's the kind of thing you'd love to see as a model, somewhere else.
Exactly. The other one I'll just touch on briefly because it's unique. It's only in Princeton, New Jersey. It's called the Community Without Walls. And this was started by a couple whose own elderly parents had gone through a really lonely, depressing old age before they died. And they started to think, well, how do we want our old age to be? We don't want to be lonely. So they created this social support network called the Community Without Walls. So they started by sending a letter to friends saying, do you want to talk about what your old age will be like? They got a huge response. So they formed this nonprofit, and it's totally social support. They're adamant about that. They don't want each other to be seen as clients or, they're totally social support. They now have 450 members, and they wanted to keep a sense of community, so they've broken that up into chapters of 100 each. So your chapter will meet once a month for potluck and speaker, and then they have a million clubs, walking club, death and dying club, music club, anything. This Death and Dying Club is actually I was impressed with that. They're just getting people to talk about stuff that folks have a hard time talking about.
Do they laugh a lot?
Yes, she said they did.
My auntie had a great time at the bereavement club.
Yeah.
Just laugh there.
Met her new boyfriend. That's great. Now, some people groused in the Community Without Walls because they felt like they were getting older and they needed more help, and having a good friend is great, but they needed more than that. So they formed another organization called Secure at Home, which was also a Jewish social service agencies have been huge in this whole movement with NORCs, with a lot of this. Somebody mentioned it earlier. And so they have you pay, I think it's $400 a month to this Secure at Home, and they sort of look out for you. And they've had great success at keeping people at home and out of assisted living simply by monitoring their meds, their medication, helping look around the house to make sure there's not fall, things that'll make people
That's
fall.
gotta be a pretty big staff then to do something like that, right?
Right, that's the Secure at Home. So it's like a partner with. So there's I think one RN and a couple aides.
Huh.
Yeah.
Are they funded mostly through grants? Because I know in Miami, that's what they're looking for.
I don't know what percent. I had the impression that this $400 a month covered the basic care, and if you need more care, then you pay more. So I thought it was paid for by the clients, but I'm not 100% sure about that. The most inspiring model I found was started by a nonprofit called Generations of Hope. I don't know if any of you saw on the PBS NewsHour recently, a place called Bridge Meadows in Portland, Oregon. This was, there's three of these. The first one is in Rantoul, Illinois, on an abandoned Air Force base. And it's an intentional community started by this visionary woman, Brenda Ehart, who worked with foster children. And she was so sick of the failure of our country to provide a good life for foster kids that she tried to totally reimagine how it could be. And she decided what they needed basically was to live in Mayberry. I mean, that they needed a normal community and neighborhood. So she created this intentional community that's made up of adoptive families who want to adopt foster kids, and she decided the missing piece was grandparents. So older people are allowed to move there for reduced rent in exchange for a commitment to volunteer. Usually it's at least 6 hours a week in the community. And it's been fabulously successful because they also have a support system on site to help the adoptive families deal with the very challenging issues that these children often have. And as one little statistic of why I say it's been a fabulous success, they've been around 20 years actually, this isn't new, the one in Illinois. 100% of their foster kids that were foster kids have graduated from high school. Nationally, that figure is 30% for foster kids. So just having a loving community, forget the bureaucracy, forget all this stuff we do.
How many kids have gone through it or live there?
Cumulative.
I'm just wondering what we're talking about.
Well, it's one community, so
Right.
it's not
No, I'm
thousands
just
and
curious,
thousands.
how large is it?
I would have to look in the book.
Okay.
I'm drawing a blank. So there's one in Illinois, one in Portland called Bridge Meadows, and you can go on the PBS NewsHour link and see it. It's a nice segment. And one in Massachusetts, East Hampton maybe, called Treehouse. And the older people I interviewed just found such meaning in it. They planned to die there. They didn't, it wasn't like they were going in to do the Peace Corps for 2 years or something. This was their home. And in fact, at the original one, they've had to build a new building totally accessible for the real elders who want to live there through the end of their lives. So it's built smack in the middle of the community so that the kids will still be coming and visiting, and you're not required to do the volunteer work anymore when you get quite old. But I was really moved by this model.
How old is the one in Portland?
It's just a few years old. Okay, to the affinity group thing that you had raised is the next model. Some of these these communities have bonded around a particular interest or background, and I'll just give you a range. Gays and lesbians, who have often been terribly discriminated against, both in long-term care and traditional retirement communities. Retired union postal workers have a great community in Florida. Zen Buddhists are starting one in San Francisco. There is a community in Texas of RV enthusiasts who have gotten old and basically need assisted living and don't want to give up the wagon. And they formed this little, I haven't been there yet, I would love to go. So they're not roving around anymore. They're in this community. They have adult day care, basically, for very affordable. But their main community is these RVers. I guess RVers are a very close-knit band of people. And again, a very affordable way to grow old in community. So that's an affinity group. And then senior artist colonies have been started by this amazing guy named Tim Carpenter in LA. And I just spoke with him yesterday. He's now got a million ideas of other places he's going to be starting these and other things. to band around besides the arts. He's also looking at universities. But anyway, so I went to one in Burbank, and it was pretty cool. A lot of people, he had imagined people would move there who had been lifelong artists, but a lot of the people moving there had never done art, but were willing to take a risk and try it, and they were just like blossoming. People were writing plays, producing films, just doing amazing stuff, and felt like I was told things like, I'm much more ambitious now than when I was younger. You know, I'm much more willing to take a risk. It was pretty cool. And again, he has set aside a bunch of the units for affordable housing, and he's built 2 more in LA, and one of them that has like 200 units is all affordable housing. The others are mixed.
And so, do they support the seniors in their art? Like, do they have shows, or do they try to sell their work?
Well, some do, yeah. They fill up these places with studios, theaters. So the whole environment is very conducive to people being creative. They have they're either cheap or extremely, either free or very cheap classes through his nonprofit, which is called Engaged.
And these also are for older people, or like
These are all for older people. So these are called senior artist colonies.
And what does it mean to come in and be an artist when you haven't been an artist as your career? You know, like, do you have to produce?
There's no have to.
Okay.
It's all about encouraging people to be creative. And there's actually a whole body of literature on creativity and aging, which shows it's really good for healthy aging, for not only our brains, our whole physical well-being.
So you just have to have the willingness
to try. And in his newest one, they were much more intentional about trying to find people that really wanted to do the art. Because in the first one that I went to, I did hear a couple complaints that they felt like some of the people who had moved there weren't really into the art. You know, that was, you know, maybe they got the affordable housing, or maybe they just needed a place. So they did a much more stringent vetting just to see, will you take advantage? We're giving you this fabulous facility. What are you gonna do with it? So I'm interested to see if that gets a more cohesive bunch of artists.
So seniors work a scam sometimes, huh?
I know, shocking, isn't it?
show up in an artist spot.
A beret. That's funny. Oh, I have to tell you about one thing, and you can see it on the internet. The link is in my book. This lady who had never done anything artistic, Suzanne, I met her. She wrote a screenplay about, it's called Bandita, and it's about this really old lady on a walker, and she takes a public bus to go rob a liquor store. It's so funny. And This American Life got hold of it and actually they were on TV for a while, they weren't just radio, and they did a segment on Suzanne filming her Bandita film.
Did she star in it?
No, she directed it. And actually, she told me quite sadly that the Bandita actress had since gotten dementia and had had to move out, but she had memorized all her lines, and it was it's a very funny thing. I hope you all see it. It's just 10 minutes long. So. Okay, moving right along. The last 2 big, and they probably represent the most number of people, is house sharing. Well, I'll just put the whole thing under house sharing. Through every kind of iteration you can imagine. So there's what everybody calls the Golden Girls approach of usually women, but doesn't have to be women, good friends deciding to share a home together. And I think this one's really going to take off. And I met someone just a couple weeks ago who is starting the first, and I think I put it on your handout at the bottom, the first database, a national database for people, if you don't happen to already have a friend that wants to share a house with you, a way to match women who want to share a home with someone else. Then there's all kinds of house sharing that's being nurtured by nonprofits. So, for example, in Baltimore, there's one called St. Ambrose. And the idea is to help older people stay in their own homes and be able to pay for maintenance, to feel more secure. So it's a matchmaking service for home seekers and home owners. And you may think, well, why don't they just go on Craigslist? But what this nonprofit does is a lot of vetting, background checks of the home seekers. They actually interview them at length and try to find a good match for the older person. They're there for the long haul. If there's disputes, landlord-tenant disputes, they'll help you mediate. So it's, again, a very simple, affordable way. And there's a couple in Vermont. There's only, I think, maybe 40 of these nationally. But I don't see why that wouldn't take off more.
So an elderly person sells their house and becomes a tenant?
No, it's like someone owns a house.
They own the house and need a tenant in order to pay their own bills. You know, like take Vermont. I mean, just the heating and things like that can be so expensive. And I know in our area, we often see older people feel like they can't pay the property taxes anymore, even if they own their own home. So this is a way to rent rooms in a safe way. And people often form good friendships. Again, usually multi-generational friendships, because the home seekers are often, you know, unemployed young adults or college students. And sometimes they'd work out labor swaps. So they may drive the older person, or they may do lawn mowing or things in exchange for very affordable rent or even no rent. The other kind of house sharing is more organized by a city or a nonprofit, and that's where the entity will buy a house in a normal neighborhood. They don't want it to look like some, you know, subsidized housing somewhere. And then every person who lives, this is affordable housing, every person who lives there gets, I think, their own bedroom and bath, definitely their own bedroom, I think bath, but then they share the living room and kitchen. So it's a way to provide affordable housing for older people, although some of these, I think, are, again, I don't think they have children, but they may have older adults and other adults sharing a house for a very affordable way. So house sharing's probably that, and my last one, new family arrangements, involved the most people. And the recession pushed all this whole house sharing. But I'm thinking that people aren't doing this strictly for financial reasons. I think the idea of living in community can be so appealing once you're doing it and have the right mix of people that that it will grow, even if the recession ever ends. When I call new family arrangements, obviously families have been living together forever. The people I interviewed felt very clear that they needed as much as possible to have boundaries and privacy under that same roof with their family members, that they couldn't imagine it working without that. Now, obviously, this assumes you have enough space in your home that you can do that. Not everybody, I grant you, will be able to have boundaries and privacy. But, for example, one family I interviewed in San Francisco, they had bought one of those tall, older homes, and each floor of the house was a separate apartment. And they now had 4 generations. So the grandparents had one floor, people my age had another floor, and then their adult child and new baby had another floor. And they just planned to keep passing it on generation to generation. They loved it. They couldn't imagine why everybody on earth didn't do that, because they just got so much. And it helped at every step of the way, for the babies, for the teens. There was always a loving adult presence in the home, and now they were able to help the elders, and that was pretty great. I met other people who bought land and built a little small house for the older generation next to the house for the adult children. And of course, the standard one, which is still alive and well, and which I myself am doing, is the mother-in-law suite. So my 95-year-old mother-in-law just moved in with us.
How do you really feel?
Practice what you preach.
Exactly.
Move to Italy.
So those are, quick look at the models. We can either, talk more about them. The last third of my book is about some of the wider societal issues we need to address if people are really going to remain in their own communities and not be forced to go to institutional settings that they don't want. So that's everything from, there's a very positive movement going on to make age-friendly towns and neighborhoods. Are any of you living in one of these? Like Portland, New York City, the World Health Organization has something called age-friendly cities. DC is now on the path for that. So they set certain criteria of what makes you an age-friendly city. And cities strive to supply that. So I'm trying to say it's not just enough to have your own home be what you want. You're in a bigger world. And
I live in San Diego County, and I'm sure there's other communities that exhibit this behavior, but it is roll up the red carpet is the common theme in every political discussion. And I see a lot of pushback against group homes because we have HIV group homes, we have ex-con group homes, we have old people group homes, we have drug and alcohol rehab group homes, and every once in a while the city council will decide they're going to limit those or outlaw them. And granny flats during the housing boom was a big fad. And yeah, one bedroom or studios in the backyard.
Yep.
Just to max out your property.
Really?
But it wasn't for granny, it was to rent. So then the city council is saying, oh no, you're going to rent that out, and then the neighbors say we don't want renters in our neighborhood, and where are you going to put the cars? And there's always parking fights. So what kind of pushback? I mean, are these people really having to fight City Hall
well,
to develop these alternatives?
I think
Because
co-housing has met with some of that. And I think it's going to be a big battle waging exactly what you're talking about. And Portland is, the New York Times just had a great piece, that's why I'm looking at you, on Portland, Oregon, who's gone the other way in encouraging these granny flats, or I forget what they call them, but these little accessory, they're called.
It's part of their smart growth, high density thing.
Exactly. And they originally were for older people. There's no law that says you have to just rent to grandma, but a lot of people were. I think there's going to be a big battle over this in communities. I'm ready to wage one in my own town. I really think they've made it far too restrictive. I think if it's an owner-occupied home, personally, but you all can think what you want, and you want to stay there and you want to provide housing for a family, or you want to help pay your property taxes, that, you should be allowed to do that. But I know it's going to be a big, I think San Diego's not alone.
And San Diego takes an act of God to build a regular house.
Oh.
And if you go to in Carlsbad, California, just the entitlement fees are $100,000.
Wow.
So, and they're in the zoning limits, everything. So if you go to city council and say, well, gosh, I not only want to build my typical McMansion, but I want to have bathrooms or kitchens on every floor.
They would die.
It isn't going to happen because they're going to say, okay, we've got a slumlord in the middle of our nice roll up, keep the riffraff out community that we have.
Right. Well, I'm sure there will be problems. I mean, I think also just the sheer numbers of aging people in our society, though, may tip the balance in some of these communities. I also think we're going to change how I hope, how we view older people from this horrible silver tsunami that we all have to dread to seeing older people as a really valuable community resource, because we are. If I'm counting myself as a young older person. I mean, as far as volunteering, as far as there's so much experience that people want to give to their communities. So I think we really need to change the mindset about how we see the older folks in our midst.
I wondered if, as you were writing the book, just judging by the photograph here, most old people are women, aren't they? But that is changing. Are you noticing that in the homes in these communities?
Yes, I am. I mean, I would say the majority.
Was it strange, like some want to be the only guys surrounded by?
I didn't see any like that. I do think they're more popular among women.
And normally widows.
Widows or single women. I mean, I don't think I would be accused of being sexist to say that women generally are more in tune and care a lot about their social relationships. It's a huge part of our lives, and I think it is with men too, but sometimes they're not quite as proactive, shall we say, about doing that. But all these were certainly men and women, but probably a few more women, not a shocking. The other pieces I wanted to touch on that we need to think about, we as a society, are if everybody's saying, well, I'm going to age in my own home, is who's going to help them to do that? The whole home health aid conundrum. Who are, everybody who says they want to keep out immigrants, I want to say, who's going to take care of you when you're 90? Because that's a huge piece of the caregiving task force now. Workforce, excuse me. So there's some interesting developments that I touch on with worker cooperatives being formed of home health care, which might be actually a good story for you if you find that.
What is that? I mean, I know what I can imagine, but are you saying these people?
Well, instead
is
of
that
having
really
an
happening?
agent, there's just a few. There's a huge one in New York, and there's one in Wisconsin. There's just a few of them.
And what do they do when you say
So
that?
instead of working for a private agency, the members of the cooperative are the agency. So they try to do more in the way of training. They try to create a career ladder. So like maybe you become kind of a master caregiver that trains new people. They try to provide health insurance. I mean, it's pretty shocking the working conditions of aides, as I'm sure you all know.
And they hurt their backs.
Oh, it's dangerous.
'Cause they're not trained how to lift people, and
It's more dangerous than coal mining
yeah.
as far as injury.
Yeah.
Beth, I have a question
Mhm.
about the co-housing. My understanding is that they then live, essentially they're with friends or strangers, not within their own families?
What was that? I didn't. what was
No.
that?
That's not
or
right.
Do they have
No, everybody
their
has.
children and grandchildren also living with them, or the senior? Or how does that work? Where's the family of?
The ones I went to and the ones I know about, generally, it's just like any other family that lives in a single family structure. The kids stay with them until they're grown and then they go. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's not like a commune or something. I mean, people live in their own more sort of nuclear family settings. But there's a cool one in Colorado where they built a multi-generational and senior co-housing community right next to each other. And that's kind of nice because the older people can kind of move back and forth between the two. I interviewed several older people who said, I'm ready for peace and quiet. And a lot of the multi-generational co-housing, when you have the common dinners and everything, the kids are the center of attention. They dominate everything. And some older people love that. And others are like, I just want to talk about, the news or something. I don't want everything focused on the kids. So I think that side-by-side option was nice. Did you want to?
Are any of these happening within or in conjunction with for-profit, adult, active living community developments or developers,
Well,
or are they separate from?
what I looked at were separate. What interested me was the grassroots nature of this whole thing. So I didn't really delve into the for-profit developer communities, but I see them as in contrast or alongside this, I don't see them.
No, I know, but I was on the website and I found one that I'm aware of.
Oh,
actually in North Carolina.
And what is it? I'm sorry.
The place is called Fearington Village, but it's a commercial development, but it was listed as one of the village co-ops. They have, I guess, a sort of a volunteer.
Oh, I see. So it's
Okay.
volunteers within.
Yeah, so I
Oh,
was
I
wondering
see.
how much of this is sort of happening
Spilling over?
within places where there's a large.
That's a good
already-
question. I'd like to know if you find out. I really didn't look at that piece of it.
I was just wondering, I actually live in Denver, so I was wondering, do you know where the community you mentioned, where they were side by side in Colorado? Do you happen to know where it
I
was?
want to say Boulder, but if you look it's in my book.
Okay.
I think it's called, the senior one I think is called Silver Sage. And the other one has Wild in the name. It seems to me, I may be misremembering.
As long as we're asking,
It's in the book.
Sorry.
No,
all read the book.
no. Yes.
Well, since Brad brought up Farrington Village, that's a community that has a lot of wealth.
Mm.
Right.
Do you have an idea, like, do those communities succeed better than these ones that are being created for lower income seniors? 'Cause
I don't-
Farrington is not, I mean, those people come in with money and they have money to spend on whatever
My
services they
question was
need.
really, I mean, there are agglomerations of older folks that have been brought together in
Yeah.
development, and I was wondering if some of these volunteer things
Right.
are.
But I understand your question, and I don't. It depends what you mean by succeed. You mean financially, or do they have more?
But yeah, I mean, you talked about how there's a lot of momentum in the beginning and then maybe things just don't happen.
Right.
I mean, it could be because of
Well,
infighting or
that's
whatever.
another good question. I just read an article this week that these for-profit developments are being overbuilt. So, they're just salivating at us baby boomers getting old, and they just assume we're all going to want to go live in retirement communities, and that's sort of what I'm raising. Well, maybe not.
I did a story, this actually back in grad school, but it's my favorite story about an apartment building that was just for grandparents that were the main caretakers of their grandchildren.
Oh,
So
wow.
either
Interesting.
The parents of the kids had died or they were in jail.
That's very interesting.
But it was in the Bronx, and I never followed up. But
I'd like to know about that. Cool.
Can I ask you, on the age thing, I mean, you had mentioned something about, in the very beginning, about the certain type, the average age was 80s
For the villages, yeah.
villages. But it would seem like you couldn't start these with the old, I mean, it must be at the early end, right?
Well, that's a really good, and that's another really important question that makes me wonder about the whole notion of age-restricted housing, even with these new models. So what happens, say, with Community Without Walls and with a lot of these senior places is they get people forming them when they're 60s to 70s, and they all stay together. And all of a sudden, they look around, everybody's 90.
Yeah.
Who's going to volunteer? Who's going to... But more importantly, who's going to want to move there as a 60-year-old?
Right, 90s.
Well, seriously, because really you're talking then about two generations.
Yeah.
If you could have a 30-year spread easily. So I think in that way, the multi-generation places may have a leg up on the senior ones. I think it's going to be hard to... I think there'll always be a place, but I think it's a big question how long a lot of these can last. I just wanted to, I know we're getting to the end of the time, I just want to touch on two quick things. One, I think there could be a lot of good stories. The whole technology piece of staying in our own homes. I went to Georgia Tech and met my first caregiving robot. Thank you very much. I got a massage, and believe me,
You're your mother-in-law.
they are very serious about this. I mean, just like everybody who has a new idea, they say 10 years from now, it's always 10 years. 10 years, we're not going to have Alzheimer's yet. 10 years from now, there will be caregiving robots. And what was interesting is they did a lot of focus groups with older people asking, how would you feel about this? And they were surprisingly open. And they were open only for certain things. They asked them all, I think it was like 60 different tasks. And they were very clear. It would be fine if the robot vacuumed my rug, but it would be not be fine if they helped me change my clothes or something. You know, it was, which I thought was interesting.
Living alone, or?
I think a mix of living alone or living with their spouse, but
It was
just
tasks that were more like.
it was research on how,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and how would you want your robot to look was another whole study. Do you want it to look human? Do you want it not to look human? It was pretty interesting.
Like Brad Pitt.
I have an 86-year-old father who lives with me, and he goes to work every day, thank God. And clear as a bell, probably has a better memory than I do. But he comes home and he really needs this social connection. And my mother, until she died, was there and would just sit with him and listen to him talk. I don't have that patience.
A robot
My
would.
husband does. But I'm just like, oh my gosh. Because he, you know, I really don't want to know what's happening with the rest of my family because that works me up. So, I mean, they're doing whatever they're doing. I have my own. But he really needs that. And to me, I think, wow, that would be great to have somebody who serves his dinner, somebody who picks up his plate and all that. But it would not work for the social connection. His English has improved 100% because my husband speaks no Spanish. So in old age, his English has gotten really, really good because he's had to connect.
Everybody has to see this movie called Robot and Frank. If you, it's so funny. Robot and Frank. It's a caregiving robot taking care of this old guy, and it's.
Do they develop? I mean, what it does with this social?
Well, in this movie they do. It's provocative though, because it makes you see, even as the viewer, how you're identifying and starting to love this robot. It's actually quite interesting.
In Spain in the early 2000s, when there was a zero birth rate, and that was when the immigration boom started to hit really big, there was, you know, a lot of intolerance around immigrants because Spain had always been a country that had left, and so this was like a shocker to their system because they've been expulsing people, you know, like for 500 years, and but there had been kind of these new stories would come out of the news about like different communities that were particularly good at caregiving for the elderly population. So suddenly, like, there was this big backlash at the beginning against the Ecuadorians because they thought they were all involved in the drug trade. But they started to develop popularity because they were really good with their caregiving skills and they were really good listeners. And so it became this, I don't know, I think it's a great story for people interested in immigration and like looking at what cultures or what communities are particularly gentle and understanding of the elderly people.
One last thing. Oh, go ahead, and then I just want to give one last thing.
The LGBT community, are there certain developments that you're watching closely or certain models that may be resonating with that population?
There's a wonderful one in the book called Birds of a Feather in Pecos, New Mexico, that was started by a woman who her whole life had wondered what was going to happen to her as a lesbian when she got old, and she had really good financial and real estate developing skills, and she started this community that's really taken off. And what really impressed me was how close the residents of the community had become with the townspeople of Pecos, and they were very active on the hospital board. They were doing all kinds of civic fundraising. It was a really successful community. And then in California, there are several affordable housing for gay people, older gay people, communities that are supposed to be quite successful. A lot of the gay communities were super high end. I didn't look at them as much, but they seem to, there is a niche of wealthy gay retirement communities. This one, Birds of a Feather, you have to have pretty much had some money or sold your house and plunked it down here, but it sounds beautiful. I'm actually going to go visit it on my so-called book tour. But I wanted yes.
Sorry, I just wondered if you encountered at all any elder abuse when you were researching the book.
No.
It occurred to me when you were talking about house sharing, people wanting, tenants to come and live with them, and we often hear about old people being.
Right. No, I
know
didn't.
about it,
I did not. And I think one reason might have been with that example is these were highly vetted home seekers, and the nonprofit stayed. They didn't just disappear. Here's your tenant. Goodbye. I mean, they stayed in the sense of there was someone they could call.
Yeah.
So I didn't encounter that.
We hear about that all the
Of course. Oh, it's a terrible problem. The last thing I wanted to mention in my last minute is this amazing place called Full Circle America that was started in Maine by a family doc named Alan Teal, who was so sick of people being miserable in assisted living and nursing homes that he decided to really push the envelope. And he became determined that almost everybody could stay in their homes, no matter what their condition, no matter if they had dementia. And he's created this little franchise business because he wants it to spread far and wide, not for financial purposes, but because he believes in the model and he thinks in our society that's the way to do it. So it combines off-the-shelf technology, webcams, user-friendly Skype, where you just press the picture on the screen. You don't even have to dial up. And a close network of volunteers, neighbors, family, friends. So the older person is monitored with, it sounds like Big Brother. Who would want that? But we're talking about people who would be in a nursing home. This is their choice. You can be monitored by these webcams, and hopefully you'll feel safe. And we're not going to just leave you to the cameras. We're going to have a circle of folks around you to support you. And they urge the members, the older people, to take on a volunteer thing themselves so they can be making a contribution, so it's not just a one-way street. And I went up there and visited some of the older people, including one who had pretty profound dementia, and I couldn't believe what a good quality of life she had. And it's, again, so affordable. So this program, including some paid home health, people are paying on average less than $1,000 a month to stay in their own homes. I mean, what are we paying for assisted living in nursing homes? A lot more than that.
Is this just in Maine now?
Well, it's now spreading. He's come to Washington a few times, and there's 2 little pilot programs here. It's actually going to be tried by a couple villages to help keep their older members. I know I'm at the end. I'll shut up.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Sure.
This was great.
Thank you.